Growing up, I never would have considered a possibility that guitar amps would fall into the same category as phone books, 3D TVs, and floppy disks. But with the rise of digital modelers, amp profilers, and affordable DAW plugins, I kind of want to dig into how we could be getting to that point, if we're not already. So in 1982, this guy named Tim Scholes came out with what seems to be the earliest example of an amp modeler. It was called the Rockman, and essentially you just plug your guitar in, adjust a few toggles, and then what you hear in your headphones is this distorted sound, kind of mimicking what you would expect to hear from an amp. There's no way that the Rockman sounded like a legitimate amplifier, but it was good enough to be used on albums from artists like ZZ Top, Kiss, and Def Leppard. So if modelers were replacing amps as early as the 1980s, why haven't they completely taken over today? I think there are a couple answers to this question, one being technical limitations over the years, and two being gear snobs. So when I was fresh out of high school, I got my very first job working at Walmart. And as many musicians would do when they get their first taste of a paycheck, I went and spent it on gear immediately. This is what I would describe as my first big kid guitar rig, being the Line 6 Pod HD 500X. Now this was a huge step up from the solid state amp I was using before. The Pod actually sounded pretty decent, and almost any effects pedal that I could think of could be found in the menus and thrown into my digital effects chain with ease. I didn't have to worry about my little brother coming in and turning knobs when I wasn't looking because I could always just recall my settings afterwards, so it was no big deal. But as cool as I thought the 500X was, the musicians around me that were more experienced were not near as impressed. They kind of saw it as a cool toy for me to use until I got like a real guitar rig one day. So naturally, my next big investment was a Blackstar HT Stage 60. This was the first and only tube amp that I've ever actually owned, and this particular amp had a lot of bells and whistles that just made it that much more fun to play around with. So after a short time of owning it, I traded in my Pod for a basic pedal setup and then slowly added to my collection over time. And before long, I had a really, really nice sounding guitar setup, but more importantly, I looked like I had a really nice sounding guitar setup. Fast forward a few years and I discovered something very crucial about the development of my musicianship. Carrying a 60 watt amp and a large pedal board to every gig kind of sucks. I was cursed with experience in the amp modeling world and longed to one day be reunited with that simplicity once more. But deep down I knew that there wasn't a modeler that could truly live up to the quality tone of a good tube amp. Then came the Line 6 Helix. So after doing a ton of research on this thing, I decided that if the Helix is as good as people are saying it is, then I could sell my amp and pedal setup and use the money to buy a Helix and be happy forever. So I did. Not only does this thing sound amazing, but it's easy to use and infinitely easier to bring to a gig. There was less menu diving than I had to deal with on the Pod, so adjustments were almost as instantaneous as a traditional pedal board. Now, the Helix is not the only modeler that's been able to make a name for itself in the past several years, with companies like Kemper, Fractal, and even Fender taking a crack at it, and they're all doing really well. So I've seen many blind A and B tests where people are comparing each of these modelers to tube amps, and a lot of times you can tell the difference. But the funny part is there are many examples of people who can clearly tell a difference between the two, but then confidently choose the wrong one. I truly believe that we're at the point with this technology where you can get everything you need out of the right modeler. And as time goes on, it seems that more and more guitarists are becoming welcoming to musicians with digital gear. So with that being said, guitar amps are probably on the way out, right? Well, not exactly. This debate just isn't so much about tonal quality anymore. Now it ultimately just falls down to one thing: user experience. If you want to have an amp on stage or in the studio because you prefer the look, sound, or workflow, that's awesome. And truthfully, many musicians still do and probably always will. In my opinion, we don't really need amps anymore, but plenty of people still want them. In fact, I just added an amp to my collection after going several years without one. It definitely won't replace my Helix floor setup for gigs or my HX Native setup for recording, but it is going to be a super fun creative tool to play around with in the studio. I want to hear your thoughts on this topic in the comments down below, even if you completely disagree with everything that I just said. Also, if you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more videos like this. And as always, thanks for hanging out.